Catherine Barnard is a professor of EU law at the University of Cambridge, a fellow at the UK in Changing Europe, and I'm delighted to say she joins me now. Good morning, Professor. Good morning, Professor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, in my interest, I was saying that the Austrian approach to Rwanda legally is different from the UK's approach. Could you explain it to our listeners, please?
Yeah, the key difference is that the UK's approach is that if the Supreme Court says it's lawful, then the asylum seekers will be sent to Rwanda for processing, and they'll be sent for processing under Rwandan law, and if they are found to satisfy the criteria for refugee status, they stay in Rwanda. Whereas under Austrian law, under their plans, is that the Rwanda people will process the applications, and then if they find the individual does satisfy the criteria for refugee status, they will come back to Austria. And so there is a big difference between the two schemes.
Without wishing to preempt a decision by the Supreme Court, if the UK was to change its approach, which I admit with Suella Braverman in the Home Office would seem unlikely, but if the UK was to change its approach to follow Austria, would that, in your opinion, clear the Supreme Court hurdle?
Well, obviously we don't know what the courts are going to say because the High Court and the Court of Appeal were divided on this.
That's right.
And so it's really crucial we discover what the Supreme Court says and how they tackle this problem. But if the individuals were to come back to the UK, if they got refugee status, then absolutely, I think it would be a much more likely that the Supreme Court would uphold the plan. But of course, the whole point of the UK's plan is to discourage people from coming to the UK, knowing that even if they do get refugee status, they won't be able to stay in the UK. They'll have to stay in Rwanda. And so that's a really quite key element of the scheme. It's a deterrent effect. The problem is all of this requires quite a detailed knowledge of the law. And if you're desperate to get out of Eritrea or Ethiopia or wherever you're coming from, the nuance of this and the fact is it's so far down the line in your reckoning that probably the deterrent effect will probably have little effect.
I have to say, it's the idea of Rwanda discovering that an asylum seeker is in fact legitimate and that asylum seeker being unable to enter the UK where they may have family. I find that quite a difficult thing to reconcile. It seems, I'm not surprised that we're sort of in a legal bind with it at the moment. I'm just interested why Austria decided to go a different way, because obviously they've got similar situations with regard to sort of attitudes towards migration, and yet they are leaving the door open to genuine asylum seekers, effectively.
Of course, they're part of the EU. The EU has its own rules on asylum. And so what Austria is proposing is certainly on the margins of legality under EU law. And but Austria have also got elections coming up, and of course migration is probably the number one issue facing a number of European countries, and so Austria has got to be seen to appease that part of the electorate that really want Austria to take a tough line on migration, and that's why you're seeing this rhetoric.
Interesting. Professor Catherine